Dan Bongino leaned into his microphone and stated that he intended to reveal her as the greatest charlatan in the history of the legislature. He spoke with the calm demeanor of a meteorologist delivering a forecast, stating a plain fact that everyone present would soon accept as reality. The hearing room of the House Oversight Committee fell into a heavy silence, freezing every cameraman, journalist, and aide where they stood. Then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez chuckled, not a nervous reaction, but a calculated performance she had rehearsed before mirrors. It was the sort of laugh that implied this man was beneath her notice, designed perfectly for Instagram snippets. "Oh, this ought to be entertaining," she thought, as she adjusted her own microphone, her $3,000 blazer catching the studio lights flawlessly. Her styling team had selected that specific jacket for the cameras, having spent nearly an hour perfecting her makeup earlier that day. This was destined to be her moment, another viral video where she dismantled a Republican witness. A failed police officer turned podcaster attempts to lecture me about fraud, she mused. She paused for dramatic effect, scanning the room with theatrical disbelief. "What comes next? Are you going to attempt to sell me gold coins? Or perhaps emergency food for the apocalypse?" A ripple of scattered amusement came from the Democratic side of the room, while a few staffers retrieved their phones to record what they assumed would be a crushing rebuttal. She felt entirely in her element now, doing exactly what she was famous for. This was her identity, the queen of comebacks, the digital warrior, and the voice of a generation. "Maybe you should limit yourself to screaming into a microphone for angry seniors," she continued. "Leave the actual governance to people who genuinely comprehend policy," she added, earning a thumbs up from a staff member. Bongino remained motionless, sitting with absolute stillness with his hands clasped on the table, observing her theatrics with the patience of a veteran who had served 12 years in the Secret Service. He had guarded presidents and faced legitimate threats, so he knew how to wait. The laughter subsided, and the silence lengthened until Ocasio-Cortez's smile wavered for a split second. She was unaccustomed to opponents who refused to react. She thrived on reactions and required them to function. "Are you finished?" Bongino asked, his voice monotonous and unimpressed. "I am merely getting started, tough guy. You represent everything wrong with—" Bongino reached down to open his briefcase, which was worn and practical rather than fancy. "So am I," he interrupted, retrieving a single folder. It was not thick or dramatic, just a standard manila file with a typed label on the cover. He placed it on the table, positioning it so every camera in the room could read the text. The label read, "Ocasio-Cortez, the fraud," causing a murmur to ripple through the audience. $47 million, Bongino allowed the words to hang in the air without rushing them. He gave the figure space to breathe. "That is the amount of money that flowed through your network of PACs, LLCs, and shell companies over 4 years. 47 million from people who believed in you." He opened the folder, stating, "I know where every single penny went, including every transfer, every payment, and every lie." He looked directly at her, his eyes steady and certain. "By the time I conclude here today, everyone watching will know as well." He extracted the first document, remarking, "You should have remained a bartender, Congresswoman, because at least that was an honest profession." Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth to respond, to retort, to do what she always did. No words emerged, and for the first time in her political career, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had nothing to say. Dan Bongino was just getting started. Bongino flipped to the first section of the folder. He moved with the methodical patience of a man who had built cases against drug cartels and protected presidents from assassins. Every gesture was deliberate, and every pause was calculated. Let us begin with something simple, he said. Let us discuss how you live. Ocasio-Cortez rolled her eyes with practiced dismissiveness. Oh, here we go. The right-wing obsession with my clothes. Very original and creative. It is not about your clothes, Congresswoman, but your choices. It is the canyon between what you preach and how you actually live your life. He pulled out a document, which was a lease agreement. You speak frequently about affordable housing, calling it a human right. You say working families are being crushed by rent, pushed out of their neighborhoods, and forced to choose between food and shelter. He set the lease on the table. Your apartment in Navy Yard, Washington, D.C., costs $3,500 a month. It is a luxury building with a rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a 24-hour concierge. He looked up at her. That rent is more than most families in your district earn in an entire month. Not just their rent, but their total income from working multiple jobs. Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat, her posture changing slightly. It was not much, but the cameras caught it. That is standard for housing prices in D.C., as members of Congress need to maintain 2 residences, do they? Bongino pulled out another document, a spreadsheet with highlighted rows. Here is a list of available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol building. There are plenty of options under $2,000, and some under $1,500. These are modest places, the kind of places working people live. He set the list down. But you did not want those. You wanted the luxury building with amenities that most of your constituents will never experience. It is the one that costs more per month than some of them earn in 6 weeks of full-time work. He paused, adding, There is nothing wrong with wanting nice things, Congresswoman, nor with enjoying success. But there is something wrong with building your entire political brand on telling other people they cannot have nice things while you live in luxury. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney leaned over to whisper something. She waved him away with an irritated gesture. Bongino moved to the next exhibit. Let us talk about the Green New Deal, your signature legislation that made you a national figure. He pulled out a thick document. You stood on the floor of the House and said climate change is an existential threat. You said we have 12 years to act, or the world as we know it will end. You said every American needs to radically change how they live, how they travel, and how they consume. He pulled out a spreadsheet showing 66 flights in 12 months exposed in FAA records. Every single one of them was first class or business class. The room stirred. Your personal carbon footprint from air travel alone is larger than 20 average American families combined. That is 20 families in 1 year. He set the spreadsheet down. You want working people to give up their cars and stop eating meat. You want them to fundamentally transform their lives to save the planet. He looked at her. But first class is more comfortable, isn't it? Ocasio-Cortez grabbed her microphone, her voice pitched higher. Those were work-related flights for official congressional business. Were they? Bongino pulled out a photograph and held it up so every camera could see it clearly. This is Miami Beach in February of 2021, while Texas was freezing and people were literally dying without power or heat. The photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in a bikini with a champagne glass in hand, laughing in a beach cabana. You flew to Florida for a fundraiser at a beachfront mansion, while your colleagues were organizing relief efforts. Meanwhile, your constituents in New York were dealing with their own winter weather emergencies. He set the photo down. This image was posted by a friend of yours on Instagram. They deleted it within an hour when someone pointed out the optics, but nothing ever really disappears from the internet. He pulled out another image. And here you are 2 days later back in New York, tweeting about climate justice and the urgent need for the Green New Deal. He looked at her with something approaching pity. The champagne on the beach was nice, though, I am sure. Ocasio-Cortez's face flushed red, and her hands gripped the edge of the table. That was a previously scheduled engagement. Let's move on, Bongino interrupted, uninterested in her explanations as he built his case. You champion defunding the police and say communities don't need armed officers patrolling their streets. You say the money should go to social services, mental health workers, and community programs instead of cops. He spread out a new set of documents. Your personal security expenses for the last 2 years were exposed through financial disclosures that your office tried hard to bury. He pointed to the numbers. Over $70,000 exposed right here in black and white. He looked at her. Armed private security and trained professionals with guns are fine for you to keep you safe. Yet you tell single mothers in the Bronx that they do not need police protection. That is completely different because I receive credible death threats, and my life has been— So do they, Congresswoman. Bongino's voice hardened. The single mother working the night shift at a bodega in your district faces threats. The elderly man walking home from church and the kids trying to get to school through gang territory face threats. They face real, constant threats every single day. He paused. The difference is they cannot afford $70,000 in private security, and you want to take away the only protection they have. The room was completely silent now, and even the clicking of keyboards had stopped. Bongino pulled out one more set of documents from this section regarding her staff. These are the people who work for you every day, the young idealists who believed in your message. I will read from an official filing of anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics. Let me read you some highlights, he said, adjusting his reading glasses. Quote, the Congresswoman demands absolute loyalty, but treats staff like personal servants. Unpaid overtime is expected, and any complaints are met with threats about career consequences. End quote. He flipped to another page. Quote, she preaches about workers' rights on television, but runs her own office like a sweatshop where interns work full-time hours with no compensation. End quote. He read another page. Quote, there are 2 versions of her, the public one who cares about working people, and the private one who screams at junior staff for bringing the wrong coffee. End quote. He set the documents down. The champion of the working class cannot even treat her own workers with basic human decency. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked. Those complaints were never substantiated and are anonymous accusations from disgruntled employees. They are sworn statements, Congresswoman, filed under penalty of perjury from people who worked for you. These are people who believed in you and saw who you really are when the cameras are not rolling. Bongino closed that section of the folder. But you know what? Living like a hypocrite isn't actually a crime. It is just sad. It is just pathetic, and proof that you don't believe a single word of what you preach. He opened the next section where the pages were thicker and more dense. This is where we get to the actual crimes. Bongino took a slow breath before continuing, understanding pacing and how to build tension. This was the section that would end careers. Let's talk about money, he said. Specifically, let's talk about the $47 million that flowed through your political network in 4 years. He pulled out a complex diagram with lines connecting boxes and arrows showing flows of money. Names and organizations are tangled together like a web, including brand new Congress PAC, Justice Democrats, and Courage to Change PACs. 3 organizations are all connected to you, all moving money in patterns that would make a professional money launderer jealous. Ocasio-Cortez forced a dismissive laugh. Those are legitimate political organizations that support progressive candidates across the country. They were used to move money in circles until no one could trace where it actually went. Bongino held up the diagram. Let me walk you through it step by step, simple enough for everyone watching at home to understand. He pointed to the first box. Donations come into brand new Congress PAC from small donors and working people who believed in your message about fighting corruption. They gave $20 or $50, whatever they could afford, and some of them skipped meals to donate. He traced a line on the chart. That money then gets paid to Brand New Congress LLC, a private limited liability company, for campaign services, which sounds legitimate, right? Another line shows Brand New Congress LLC then pays a company called Middle Seat Consulting for more services. He looked up. Want to guess who controls Middle Seat Consulting? Silence filled the room. Your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, the same man who founded Justice Democrats and recruited you to run for Congress at a casting call. Yes, a casting call for progressive candidates. Bongino set the diagram down. The money goes in a circle from PAC to LLC to consulting firm and back into the pockets of your inner circle. Along the way, millions of dollars simply disappear into vague categories like operating expenses and consulting fees. He pulled out official filings showing Federal Election Commission records of over $1 million in payments that cannot be properly accounted for. The documentation is missing, the services are undefined, and the money just vanished. He spread the papers out. The FEC has received multiple formal complaints about these arrangements and has been investigating for years. The only reason charges haven't been filed is because the commission has been deadlocked along partisan lines. He looked at her, but the FBI doesn't have that problem, and they have been looking at this very carefully. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney was writing furiously on a legal pad and looked pale. Let's talk about something more specific, Bongino continued. Let's talk about your boyfriend. The room went very still as this was personal now. Riley Roberts, your longtime partner, is by all accounts a nice enough guy. However, he is not a political operative, not a campaign strategist, and not a communications expert. His background is in web development. He set down payment records. Your campaign and associated PACs paid Riley Roberts $6,000 a month, every month, for over a year, for marketing consulting. He did the math out loud. That's more than $72,000 from donor money for marketing consulting. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. What did he produce? What campaigns did he create? And what deliverables exist with his name on them? The silence stretched. I will answer for you, Congresswoman. Nothing. There is no portfolio, no documented work product, and no evidence that he did anything at all to earn that money. Just checks written to your boyfriend from funds donated by working people who thought they were supporting a political movement. Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose defensively. Riley provided valuable digital strategy and ongoing consultation on... Then show me, Bongino's voice cut through her explanation. Show this committee one single piece of work. He produced one strategy document, one campaign creative, one email chain discussing deliverables, or one anything. She didn't respond. I have reviewed every filing and every document your campaign produced, and his name appears only on payment records, never on any actual work product. He pulled out another piece of paper. But here is where it gets really interesting. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez. He paused, letting the name settle into the room. Maria Gonzalez is a single mother of two who lives in the Bronx in your district, the district you claim to represent. He set down a printed statement. Maria works 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings downtown at night and folding other people's clothes at a laundromat during the day. She makes about $14 an hour when you average it out, with no benefits, no sick days, and no vacation. He looked at the document. In 2018, Maria donated $50 to your campaign. That $50 represented a full day's wages for her. She had to skip buying groceries that week to afford it. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. She believed in you because she watched your videos and saw someone who looked like her and promised to fight for the forgotten. He tapped the payment record for Riley Roberts. Maria's $50 helped pay your boyfriend $6,000 a month to produce nothing. His voice dropped lower. Maria skipped meals so her kids could eat that week, and her donation went to subsidize your boyfriend's lifestyle. Ocasio-Cortez blinked rapidly, her eyes getting wet, whether from emotion or calculation. That is a gross mischaracterization of how campaign finance works. Bongino pulled out an email printout. Let me read you something. This is an email from your personal account to Saikat Chakrabarti, dated March 15, 2019. He read slowly, making sure every word was captured by the microphones. Quote, "Make sure the transfers don't look connected. Use different entity names for each step. The small donors can never find out who's really benefiting from their money, so keep it clean on paper." End quote. He set the email down on the table. That's not staff making accounting errors nor confusion about complicated campaign finance regulations. That is you personally and directly instructing your chief of staff to hide where the money was going. A Democratic member of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while the ranking member stared at the table. You told Maria Gonzalez and thousands of donors just like her that their money was funding a movement. Bongino's voice hardened. It was funding your inner circle, your boyfriend, your political operatives, and your personal lifestyle. He pulled out one final document from this section. The total amount of donor money that went directly to entities controlled by you, your boyfriend, or your close associates is $4.2 million. $4.2 million from people like Maria Gonzalez, who sacrificed for you. He closed that section of the folder. But that's just the money we can trace to American donors, as not all the money came from Americans. He opened the next section. And that is where this story gets really dark. Bongino turned to a new tab in the folder with photographs clipped to the top. June 24, 2018 was a date that transformed your entire career and made you a national figure. He held up the famous photograph every person in America had seen. Ocasio-Cortez at the border fence in Texas, hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The image of compassion confronting cruelty. This image went viral within hours and was shared millions of times. It launched 1,000 news segments and magazine covers. It turned you from a long-shot primary challenger into a national icon. He set it down gently, almost reverently. A young Latina congresswoman overcome with emotion at the sight of immigrant children separated from their parents was exactly what the moment needed. He paused. There is just one problem with that narrative. He held up another photograph taken 5 minutes before the famous shot at the same location. The same photographer kept all his images and was kind enough to share the complete sequence with federal investigators. The second photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in the same white outfit at the same fence, but she wasn't crying. She was laughing with her staff, checking her makeup in a phone screen, and adjusting her hair for the cameras. And this one was taken 12 minutes after the crying photo. He showed a third image. Ocasio-Cortez smiling broadly and posing for selfies with supporters, without a tear in sight. Your grief lasted exactly as long as it needed to for the photographers to get the shot. Approximately 5 minutes sandwiched between smiles and selfies. Ocasio-Cortez shook her head vigorously, her voice rising. Those photos are completely taken out of context, because I was genuinely overwhelmed by what I saw at that facility. Were you? Bongino pulled out a text message log. This is from your communications director that morning, sent 3 hours before you arrived at the facility. He read from the printout. Quote, "Make sure photographers are positioned at the fence before she arrives. We need the emotion shot. Have tissues ready in case she needs them, and tell her to think about something sad if she needs to get the tears going." End quote. He set it down. The emotion shot is what your team called it. Not a genuine moment of human compassion, but a performance to be manufactured and captured for maximum political impact. He pulled out another text exchange. And this one is from you sent to your campaign manager 2 hours after the photos were taken. Quote, "The crying pic is blowing up everywhere, and this is going to be massive for fundraising. Get the donation page ready so we can capitalize before the news cycle moves on." End quote. His voice dropped lower and harder. The children in those facilities were real. Their fear was real, and their suffering was real. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez. And you used them as props for a fundraising email. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. I care deeply about those children, and I have fought tirelessly for immigration reform. Have you? Bongino pulled out a calendar document. This is your official congressional schedule for the 2 years following that famous photograph. Let's count how many times you visited a border facility to actually engage with the issue. He flipped through the pages. The answer is 0, not once. You never went back because the photo op was enough. He pulled out more documents. But you did find time to do 427 media interviews about the border. You found time for magazine photo shoots and documentary appearances. You found time to raise $11.3 million off immigration-related appeals. He set the papers down. You just never found time to actually go back and do anything substantive about the problem. He spread out printouts of her social media posts. You called those facilities concentration camps and compared Border Patrol agents to Nazi guards. You said America was operating a system of state-sponsored terror against brown children. He looked at her. Strong words, inflammatory words, words designed to generate maximum outrage and maximum donations. He pulled out a different document. Words that also put targets on the backs of federal agents trying to do an impossible job. He read from an incident report. 3 Border Patrol agents were physically assaulted by protesters who cited your rhetoric as justification. One of them, Agent Manuel Padilla, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. He has a wife and 3 young children who spent those 2 weeks wondering if their father would ever be the same. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, but for once nothing came out. You got your headlines, while Agent Padilla got brain damage and broken bones. Bongino moved to the next page. But let's examine what you actually did for immigration policy. Not the tweets, not the Instagram stories, not the cable news appearances, but the actual legislative work. He held up a thin document. This is every piece of immigration-related legislation you have sponsored in 4 years in Congress. He flipped through the pages slowly. Resolutions, non-binding statements, symbolic gestures, and press release material designed to generate social media engagement. He set it down. Not a single substantive bill that became law, not one policy change that actually helped a single immigrant family. Just performance. He pulled out financial records. But while you were performing outrage, something interesting was happening with your fundraising. Open border advocacy groups and organizations pushing for abolishing all deportations donated heavily to your PACs after that photo went viral. He pointed to specific line items. Some of these organizations have been flagged by law enforcement for concerning connections. Money flows that trace back through several layers to people who profit from chaos at the border. Ocasio-Cortez slammed her hand on the table. That is an outrageous and racist insinuation. Is it? Bongino held up a Department of Homeland Security report. This is from an ongoing investigation into funding networks for organizations that actively work to undermine border security. Your PACs received donations from 3 groups specifically named in this report. He set it down. Did you check where the money came from, or ask questions about these donors? Did you do any due diligence at all? Silence filled the room. You just cashed the checks and kept performing. He leaned forward slightly. Every year, thousands of migrants die crossing the desert because they were told the border was open. Women are assaulted, children are trafficked, and families pay their entire life savings to criminal organizations who leave them to die in the heat. His voice was hard now, no longer professorial, but something closer to anger. And you profit from the chaos. You fundraise off the suffering and build your political brand on the bodies of people you claim to care about. He closed that section. But exploiting immigrants for donations and social media engagement isn't even the worst thing you've done. He opened the next section of the folder. The worst thing is what you really think about the people who actually voted for you. Bongino paused before opening this section. When he spoke again, his voice had changed to something quieter and almost sad. This is the part that's going to hurt the most, he said. Not you, Congresswoman, because you already know what's in here. He looked toward the gallery and the cameras. This is going to hurt the people watching at home, the people who believed in you and saw you as a symbol of hope. He opened the folder. Let's start with Amazon. Ocasio-Cortez visibly stiffened, and her hands gripped the edge of the table. In 2019, Amazon announced plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, in your district. He pulled out economic projections. 25,000 jobs, not minimum wage jobs, but professional positions with an average salary of $150,000 per year. Direct investment of over $2 billion into your community. Tax revenue that would have funded schools and infrastructure for decades. He spread out news clippings from that time. You led the opposition, organized protests, and called it corporate welfare. You said the tax incentives were a giveaway to a billionaire who didn't need help. He pulled out a statement from Amazon. And it worked. Amazon pulled out. They took those 25,000 jobs somewhere else and invested those billions of dollars in a different community. He looked at her. You celebrated and called it a victory for the people. Your supporters cheered. He paused. But a victory for which people exactly? He pulled out an email. This is from your personal account sent to a major donor 1 week after Amazon announced they were withdrawing. He read slowly and carefully. Quote, "The Amazon thing worked out even better than we expected. Those tech workers would have completely gentrified the district within years. They would have voted for centrist Democrats or even Republicans. Quote, better to keep the current voter base in place. Poor people who depend on government programs are reliable voters for us. Quote, that is our base, that's our path to power. End quote. The hearing room was absolutely silent, and no one moved. You didn't kill those 25,000 jobs because of principle, Bongino said slowly. You killed them because financially secure, well-educated voters might not need you anymore. He set the email down. 25,000 families lost chances to build wealth, buy homes, and send their kids to good colleges. It was their chance to achieve the American dream you claimed to fight for. He looked at her. And you killed it deliberately because their success would have threatened your political power. Ocasio-Cortez was shaking now, her voice strangled. That email is being taken completely out of... That's not what I meant. What did you mean then? Explain it to the people in your district, what you meant when you said it's better to keep them poor and dependent. She didn't answer because she couldn't. Bongino pulled out phone records. Amazon was cold calculation and political strategy, but this next part is personal. This is what you really think about the people who trusted you. He held up a thick printout. These are text messages from your personal cell phone obtained legally through a warrant issued as part of an ongoing federal investigation. He found a specific page. March 15, 2021, text message to a college friend from your Boston University days. He read slowly, letting each word land. Quote, these Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. Just say the word socialism a few times and throw in some Spanish phrases, and they cheer like trained seals. End quote. Gasps erupted from the gallery. A staffer walked out of the room. Bongino continued with the same conversation 2 minutes later. Quote, they'll vote for me literally no matter what I do. They're not smart enough to realize when they're being played. All I have to do is say I'm fighting for them, and they believe it. End quote. More gasps were heard, and someone in the gallery was crying. And then this one, he said. Quote, the Bronx is basically just my brand at this point, like a logo I own. I would never in a million years actually live there again. Can you imagine? End quote. He set the phone records down. Those are your words, your private thoughts written to a friend when you thought no one would ever see them. Ocasio-Cortez's voice was barely a whisper, broken. Those texts are taken completely out of context, as I was venting about the pressures of... What context makes it acceptable to call your voters trained seals? Silence followed. What context makes it okay to say they're too stupid to know when they're being played? More silence. What context makes calling your district just a brand that you own anything other than contempt for the people who elected you? Bongino didn't wait for an answer. There is no context that makes any of that acceptable. There's just you saying what you really believe when you thought you were safe. He pulled out more documents. Let's talk about who you actually employ. He spread out personnel records. You have 14 full-time staffers in your congressional office, and I went through their backgrounds and resumes. He pointed to the data. 12 of them are from out of state and moved to New York to work for you. 10 have Ivy League degrees. Only 2 actually grew up in your district. He looked at her. The champion of the working-class Bronx can't find qualified workers from the Bronx. He pulled out another document. Your Hispanic outreach coordinator, the person responsible for connecting you with the Latino community, was raised in suburban Connecticut. She attended Yale and doesn't speak fluent Spanish. He set it down. But she had the right family connections and knew the right people from the right schools. He pulled out more employment records. Meanwhile, there are young people in your district who would give anything for a chance to work in Congress. Kids who grew up in the Bronx and went to public schools. They actually know the community and could actually connect with constituents. He shook his head. You never gave them a chance because they didn't have the right credentials or the right pedigrees. Bongino pulled out one more piece of evidence. Speaking of your connection to the community, let's talk about your heritage. Ocasio-Cortez tensed visibly. You present yourself as a Latina from the Bronx, a daughter of the working class connected to her Puerto Rican roots. He pulled out a transcript. This is from a Univision interview last year where you attempted to answer several questions in Spanish. Here's what a professional linguist who reviewed the tape had to say. He read from the analysis. Quote, the subject speaks Spanish at approximately an intermediate tourist level. Her pronunciation is heavily Americanized, and her grammar is consistently incorrect in ways that a native speaker would never make. The errors suggest someone who learned Spanish as a second language in school rather than at home. End quote. He set it down. You perform being Latina for the cameras and use Spanish phrases as props, but the actual language, the actual culture, and the actual connection to the community, you never really had it. Ocasio-Cortez was crying now, tears cutting lines through her makeup. My family is Puerto Rican. I am Puerto Rican. This is a racist attack on my identity. It's not an attack on Puerto Ricans, Congresswoman. It's an observation about you specifically. It is about the gap between the identity you perform and the person you actually are. Bongino's voice softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with pity. You grew up in Yorktown Heights, where the median household income is $96,000 a year. It is one of the wealthier suburbs in New York, with nice houses, good schools, and country clubs nearby. He paused. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with having a comfortable childhood or being fortunate. He looked at her. But that's not the story you tell, is it? You tell people you're from the Bronx, from the struggle, from the streets, because that story sells better, because that story wins elections. He shook his head slowly. You stole the identity of your own community and appropriated their struggle to advance your career. And in private, you laugh at them for being stupid enough to believe you. He closed the folder. That's not democratic socialism, Congresswoman. That's just fraud. Plain and simple fraud. The hearing room felt different now. The energy had shifted completely. The confident arena of political theater had become something else, something quieter and sadder. Ocasio-Cortez sat slumped in her chair, her makeup ruined. The polished warrior who had walked in that morning had been replaced by something smaller and broken. I want to respond, she said, her voice thick from crying. I have the right to respond to these accusations. Chairman James nodded. The witness has concluded his testimony, so the Congresswoman may make a statement. Ocasio-Cortez straightened in her chair and tried to find the fire that had always come so naturally before. She tried to summon the fighter who had never backed down. This is a political witch hunt, she began, her voice cracking but pushing through. A coordinated attack by right-wing forces who are terrified of strong progressive women. Every piece of so-called evidence presented today has been taken out of context, twisted, and weaponized by people who want to silence the voice of working people. She looked at the cameras and tried to find her audience. They're afraid of us, afraid of a movement that threatens their grip on power, so they dig through our emails and private lives looking for anything they can twist. Her voice gained some strength. I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. And I will not apologize for fighting for the people who need a champion in Washington. She turned to face Bongino directly. You're a failed cop who couldn't cut it in law enforcement, a conspiracy theorist who peddles nonsense to angry people for money. You are a puppet for billionaires who want to crush the dreams of ordinary Americans. She lifted her chin. Nothing you've said here today changes who I am or what I stand for. The room waited. Bongino slowly reached back into his briefcase. You done? He pulled out one final document. Because I have something else you should see. He set it on the table. This is a cooperation agreement signed 6 months ago by Saikat Chakrabarti, your former chief of staff, the man who built your entire political operation from the ground up. The color drained completely from Ocasio-Cortez's face. He's been talking to federal investigators for half a year. He provided the emails, the financial records, and the text messages. Everything I presented today came from the man who knows exactly how your operation worked because he helped build it. Bongino pulled out another document. Your boyfriend Riley Roberts has been interviewed twice by the FBI. He provided detailed records of every payment he received and exactly what he did to earn them, which was nothing. Another document followed. 4 former staff members have given sworn statements about the working conditions in your office, the unpaid overtime, and the threats. He spread them all across the table. You called this a witch hunt, but witch hunts chase imaginary enemies. The evidence against you is documented, corroborated, and real. Ocasio-Cortez turned desperately to her colleagues, the other members of the squad. These were the women who had stood beside her through every controversy and defended her. Ilhan, Rashida, Ayana, you know this is political persecution. Tell them. Silence filled the space. Representative Omar studied her notes intently, while Representative Clyde became fascinated by her phone. Representative Presley looked away toward the gallery at nothing in particular. No one spoke. They're not coming to rescue you, Bongino said quietly. They've known this was coming for weeks. We made sure they knew, and they've already made their choices. He pulled out printed statements. Representative Omar released this 45 minutes ago. Quote, I have no knowledge of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial arrangements and cannot speak to any ongoing investigation. End quote. He read another paper. Representative Tlaib released this morning. Each congressional office is responsible for its own compliance with campaign finance regulations. I wish my colleague well during this difficult period. Representative Presley hasn't released a formal statement, but she unfollowed you on all social media platforms yesterday. She's deleted every photograph featuring both of you from the last 3 years. He set the papers down. They saw the evidence, calculated the odds, and chose to save themselves. Ocasio-Cortez looked around the room with growing desperation at her staff, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at her colleagues, who were finding reasons to be anywhere else. She looked at the cameras that were still rolling, capturing every moment of her collapse. She was utterly alone. "This isn't fair," she whispered, the words coming out broken like a child's. "I was trying to help people. I was trying to change things. I was trying to make a difference." Bongino's voice was not cruel when he responded, just tired and disappointed. Maybe you were once at the beginning. Maybe there was a version of you who actually believed the things you said. He closed his briefcase. But somewhere along the way, you started believing you were special. You believed the rules didn't apply to you and that you were too important to be held accountable. You decided the people who supported you were tools to be used rather than citizens to be served. He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I don't think you're evil, Congresswoman. I think you're what happens when someone gets famous too fast. You got too much power, too young, with no one around willing to tell you no. I think you got lost somewhere between your first viral tweet and your 50th magazine cover." He stood up. "But that doesn't undo the damage, doesn't give back the money, doesn't unbreak the trust, and doesn't help the people you hurt." Chairman James cleared his throat and addressed the room formally. "This committee has heard extensive testimony and examined substantial evidence regarding potential violations of federal campaign finance law, wire fraud statutes, and congressional ethics standards." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Based on the proceedings today, I am directing committee staff to prepare a formal referral to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Additionally, I am recommending that the House Ethics Committee open its own investigation immediately." He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you are strongly advised to retain experienced legal counsel. This hearing is adjourned." He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. Ocasio-Cortez tried to stand, but her legs didn't cooperate. She grabbed the table for support, her knuckles white against the wood. Her staff rushed over to help her, but she pushed them away with trembling hands. "I can walk out of here myself," she said. She made it 3 steps toward the door before the wall of camera flashes started. A blinding storm of light and noise. Reporters were shouting questions from every direction. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Do you have a response to the text messages? What do you say to the donors who trusted you? Will you cooperate with the federal investigation?" She didn't answer because she couldn't. Words had always been her weapon, but now they had abandoned her completely. The door closed behind her, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was already gone. Her career didn't end with handcuffs or dramatic confrontation. It ended with silence and closed doors, and somehow that was worse. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 1 hour, the video clips were everywhere, and social media exploded with reaction. Within 2 hours, every cable network had cleared their regular programming for continuous coverage. Within 3 hours, the first calls for resignation came from members of her own party. They were quiet calls, careful calls, but calls nonetheless. In the Bronx, the reaction was different from the political chatter in Washington. Maria Gonzalez sat in her small apartment that evening, watching the news coverage on a television she couldn't afford to replace. The screen was old, and the picture was fuzzy, but the images were clear enough. In her weathered hands, she held a donation receipt from 2018 for $50. It was a full day's wages from years ago when she had believed. A local reporter had found her somehow, knocking on her door with a camera crew looking for the human story behind the numbers. "I believed in her," Maria said quietly, her English accented but clear. She had practiced these words in her head all afternoon. "I told my daughters, look at this woman, she looks like us. She talks about our struggles. She came from nothing. And now she's in Congress fighting for people like us." She looked down at the faded receipt. "I told my girls that if they worked hard and stayed honest, maybe they could do something important too. Maybe they could change things." The tears came slowly. "I skipped buying groceries that week to send her that money. I told myself it was an investment in our future, in our community, in someone who understood." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She called us stupid and said we were easy to manipulate. She laughed at us with her rich friends." The reporter asked what she wanted to say to Ocasio-Cortez. Maria thought for a long moment before answering. "I want to say that she broke something important, not just my trust, something bigger. She made people like me afraid to believe in anyone ever again." She looked at the donation receipt one more time. "That's the worst part, not the $50. I can earn $50. But the hope she stole, I don't know how to get that back." Across the district, similar scenes played out through the evening and into the night. In bodegas, laundromats, crowded apartments, and late-night diners where working people grabbed meals between shifts. People who had believed watched their faith collapse in real time. They had given her their votes, their money, their hope, and their dreams for something better. She had given them a performance. Dan Bongino did one interview that evening, only one, turning down the others. The reporter asked if he was proud of what he had accomplished. Bongino shook his head slowly. Proud isn't the right word for any of this. There's nothing here to be proud of. He paused, choosing his words carefully. A young woman destroyed her own career through arrogance and greed. Thousands of people who believed in her feel betrayed tonight. Her district still doesn't have the 25,000 jobs she killed. The immigrant families she used as props are still suffering at the border. He looked directly at the camera. I didn't create this situation. I just exposed it. I presented evidence and let people draw their own conclusions. The reporter asked if he felt any sympathy for Ocasio-Cortez. Bongino thought about it before answering. I feel sympathy for who she could have been. She had real gifts, intelligence, charisma, and the ability to connect with people. If she had used those gifts honestly, she might have actually accomplished something meaningful. He shook his head. But she made different choices, and those choices led here. Later that night, Dan Bongino sat alone in his home office. The television was off, his phone was silenced, and the folder that had contained his evidence was filed away. He thought about the young woman who had walked into Congress 4 years ago. He had watched her rise like everyone else. He had seen the fire in her eyes and the certainty in her voice. 29 years old and absolutely sure she was going to change the world. Somewhere along the way, she had started making choices. Small ones at first, probably. A donor not questioned too closely, or an expense report fudged slightly. A private text message that said what she really thought. Until the small compromises became big ones, and the lies grew too heavy to carry. Until the person she performed on camera had nothing in common with who she actually was in private. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor at the bureau. New file on your desk tomorrow. Different name, same pattern. Bongino read the message twice, then set his phone down. There was always another one. Always another politician who believed they were above the rules. Another true believer who traded their principles for power and comfort. Another promise broken to the people who could least afford broken promises. He filed the folder away in his cabinet with the others. Then he turned off the light and headed home to his family. Tomorrow, the work would continue. It always did. 3 days later, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez submitted her resignation from Congress. The letter was brief and cited a need to focus on personal matters and family. It did not admit to any wrongdoing, did not apologize to her donors, and did not acknowledge the people she had called stupid. The investigation continued without her as subpoenas were issued and grand juries were convened. The wheels of justice, slow but grinding, began to turn. In the Bronx, life went on. Maria Gonzalez went back to work at the laundromat the morning after the hearing. She had bills to pay, children to feed, and no time for grief over broken political dreams. But she took down the poster she had kept on her wall. The one with Ocasio-Cortez's face and the slogan about fighting for working families. She folded it carefully and put it in the trash. Some things once broken cannot be repaired.